haven't uploaded any of my videos since this crisis started, and I don't plan on editing them or watching them again because I just don't want to see what I was saying. And I managed to shower the last 2 days, which is good. And I'm taking a Seroquel in the morning and one in the afternoon, evening time. And then I tried to take 2 last night to fall asleep, along with 900 milligrams lithium and 50 milligrams of trazodone, but I couldn't quite fall asleep, so I took another Seroquel. So I'm taking a lot of medications for me. And now that I'm a bit able to do some stuff, I'm kind of questioning what's next. But it's a big win to feel like maybe there is something next, because for many of the days I didn't know if there was going to be a tomorrow. And I'm still not quite convinced. I'm still struggling somewhat, because last night I took the meds and then I laid down right away to try to fall asleep, and I felt this fear and my heart was beating weird and it felt difficult to fall asleep. Like I kept falling asleep and then waking, like my whole body would just go and it was terrifying, but it didn't go on too long. And then yesterday morning I felt some fear when I woke up, and like panic and scariness, but it only lasted a short while. And luckily yesterday I got in to see my psychiatrist. And these are all things that I was hoping never to have to do again. And the universe has other plans, like usual. We can never really predict what's going to happen. And I could make up all sorts of reasons why this has happened, and I think it's something I'm going to have to deal with every 8.5 months until I figure out a different way to resolve it, because resolving it through good nutrition wasn't the answer. I've been thinking about that process, and I think it made it better and it made it worse. The nutrients, I feel like, made it easier to bear, but then it did get worse over time, but more slowly. So it put me sort of in a more challenging position, in that when it got really bad, it was really bad, but it took a longer time to get really, really bad. So my endurance, or my ability to bear that intensity, was stronger. So it was more intense, but it felt less intense, which is a strange feeling. And it also brought up a lot of past. It was like living in the past of all my lifetimes, and not knowing what's what and when and all that, and just absolutely terrifying. It's just absolutely, it feels like it's death right now. Terrifying. The feeling we must have the moment before we pass, if we have some awareness of that, if we're not sleeping or something, and however it works. But so yeah, that was really, really challenging, and it's not over. And being on these meds right now feels like my arms feel like they're gonna fall asleep or like fall off my body. I feel like I need to shake them to give them some density or something. And I'll keep going with this, taking extra Seroquel, and I got a new prescription. I do have some meds left, but it's good, I think, to have some extra in case I can't see the doctor for a while, or blah blah, whatever, I don't know. And I told my doctor the whole story, like being in California and having a bit of a crisis a month or so into it, and then deciding to taper off meds, and being off meds nearly 5 months, I think. Yeah, nearly 5 months. So I'm saying it's good to let my body have a break. And they said medications are a tool and blah blah blah. And so it was nice that they didn't fully be like, you don't have insight, you don't you weren't compliant, you went against what you should have done, and all this. They didn't judge me or blame me for that at all. So that was nice. And they even said, maybe you can taper off again, like when this crisis is over. And if this crisis thing is something that happens every 8.5 months, maybe you don't need the meds in between. So maybe you can taper off again. And I was like, okay, cool. That's awesome. And I don't even know how comfortable I feel with that. I'm going to take this Seroquel regime probably for at least 2 weeks. And I clicked on an Instagram live video of a friend that I used to know somewhat. And they're somebody that lived their life exactly how they want, it seems. One of the rare few who have managed to design a life like that. And he created, in the live video, he talked about how he created a documentary about Woodstock Fruit Fest because he's a fruitarian. I don't know if he's the organizer of that fruit festival, but he made a documentary, and so I signed up to get early viewing of that, and then I paid $20 donation to have access today. It'd be cool to see what he created and what he's up to, because I could be a fruitarian, I feel, if I lived in tropical climates. And I was looking through this information I had from the spiritual guy I studied with years ago, and it was I would take notes on what he was saying, but in the middle of it said something like colonics and raw food to heal mental illness. And maybe in the next video I'll show that little blurb, because I'm not going to edit this, so I'm not going to grab it now. But it's just a random side note that I don't know why I wrote it there. And when I did have 3.5 years of wellness, I was raw vegan for part of it. And I did get colonics too, actually, about 6 of them. And I experienced quite a long period of wellness before I went off my meds with the help of my doctor, with that permission. And then things started, this cycle of like 8 months-ish of wellness and a couple weeks of not so good health. And I could look back and say tapering off was a mistake, and that a lot of the things they've said in mental health have been true, even though I've negated them in my conversations with myself along the way about once you do stabilize, it's harder to get and remain stable, because the first time I was destabilized, I went back on all the meds, but I've experienced a relapse. Here I am using all this medical language. Relapse, an episode of the crisis every 6.5 to 8.5 months since, so 4 times. But yeah, so much to consider, and I think part of it is doing too much. And I listened to an interview with this guy, I think his name was something Cole, and he has a podcast called Waking Up Bipolar, and I saw the link to it on the Shades of Awakening first volume release of their little online magazine or something. And he was interviewing someone named Maria Hornbach, and she writes a lot of books and stuff about bipolar. And one of the things she mentioned in the talk, when I was kind of scrolling through it before I listened to most of it, was she said she finds she can have a really fascinating intellectual and like writing type life if the rest of her life is boring, meaning her actual life, so she can blog a lot and write books and all that and be really intellectually stimulated, if in her life she walks, she hikes, and I can't remember what the third thing was, but they were just very basic things. So I'm wondering about trying that strategy. And the thing was, I talked about that with myself, I think, or at least I thought about that possibility and was thinking about that before I heard her say that. So the trend continues on that, about thinking something and then somebody else confirms it somehow. So I'm wondering, what kind of boring life can I create? Because I was designing a really non-boring life, like this trip that I wanted to go on as part of the launch of the business, of celebrating being off meds for 9 months. And now I've failed at that, basically. I've totally failed. And that's part of what has made this episode more challenging, is that it wasn't just all the past trauma, guilt, and who did what, and what was the cause of this, and causality back to the Big Bang if you're going to try to find any cause or whatever. Can't really remember what I was saying, but something about, yeah, I think designing a boring life because, oh yeah, all the failure in the present moment of failing to be off the meds and then being on micronutrients and letting that process of like psychosis, I guess, take hold so deeply, that made more deep awfulness come into consciousness. But then seeing how I created that by trying to accomplish a certain goal added extra guilt and shame and blame and cause, and feeling like I didn't design my life properly. And coming back from California, I should have worked harder to have a really peaceful place and things like that. And thinking, wow, I should have known that. But then at the same time realizing this process has happened every 6.5 to 8.5 months, no matter what I do. And so being willing to use the tool of Seroquel, and it just seems like I'm afraid of the human world. And then I looked at the front page of the newspaper today, which I never do, but it said something about there's a proposal in to turn a beautiful forest, a big chunk of it, into a gravel pit for the next 50 years and trucking out gravel for the next 50 years. It's like, oh, maybe I just resonate more with nature, and I do. So maybe I want to do something with nature in the future as opposed to mental health advocacy. Something with animals or forests, or like, why not? Why do I have to keep going on this mental health talking trajectory? I can talk about how it affects my life, but maybe I've talked about the opposites of mental illness, so being engaged with those as opposed to being engaged with mental health. And I'm going to end this video so I can upload it one day without editing it, and talk again in the next one.